This week in journalism, we are going to look at how to write headlines, which, since you've been writing stories, now you need to give your stories, in essence, a title, which in journalism we refer to as a headline. Officer shoots man with knife. The above headline is indicative of what is wrong with most headlines. They are ambiguous and don't really say what the writer meant. The story actually dealt with the fact that a knife-wielding man was shot in the leg by a police officer. But what it says is that the officer shot the man with a knife. Well, you can't shoot people with a knife, you stab people with a knife. So the headline doesn't make any sense. Fleeing car crashes onto sofa after TV watcher leaves at ad. What is that even supposed to mean? This headline actually went along with a story where a car crashed into a house, landing on a sofa, where a person had just been sitting on that sofa, but had gotten up to leave to go to the kitchen during a commercial. This headline, though, makes absolutely no sense. To be successful, a headline must relate to the story, lead the reader into the story, fill the allotted space, and be grammatically correct. News headlines. They're normally written as sentences. That means that they contain a subject and a verb. Some guidelines for writing news headlines. Well, strive to make it an attention grabber. You want people to read your story. Most people, when they're reading the newspaper, they scan the headlines. They see a headline that catches their attention, they read the article. If they don't, they move on to something else. So you want a headline that's going to grab your reader's attention. You also want to avoid the repetition of words and phrases. You don't want to repeat words and headlines of stories that are on the same page spread or next to each other, and you also don't want to repeat words from the header. So if you're in the senior section of your paper, you don't need to use the word senior in your headlines. Use a comma to replace the word and. You don't have a lot of space in headlines, so it's acceptable to use the comma to replace and, which would not normally be acceptable in writing. Do not use a, an, or the. Not needed in headlines unless you're looking at the title of something. Separate related thoughts with a semicolon. Okay? Use present tense for both past and present stories. So verbs should be in present tense. You should use information from the lead for your headline, but don't repeat your lead word for word as the headline. Pick out a couple key words and use them in a unique way. You also should use the full names of people when you're referring to people in your headlines. Unless, of course, the person is well known, like President Obama. You don't necessarily need to use his full name, because everyone knows who he is. A little bit about the length of headlines. A headline must fit in the space given to it. Just like your story has to fit into the columns and length that your editor gives you, your headline only gets so much space. Typeface and font size are important considerations when writing a headline. Some newspapers use the same typeface, or what we would refer to as font, throughout their entire publication. Others use different ones for different sections, and that's important for you to know. The size that your font's allowed to be is also important. Obviously, front page news often has a larger font size, whereas less important stories normally get a smaller font size for the headline. Also, not all fonts are created equal. There's two types of fonts. One's known as serif type, and the other one is called sans serif type. The first example here with Garamond is a serif type font. If you will look at the letters, you will see that they have these little straight lines at the end, which are actually called serifs. So here where the G has the straight line across it and the R has the straight line at the bottom, those are known as serifs. So any font with lines at the ends of the letters is a serif font. Those are often much more easier to read and clear. The second type of font is a sans serif font. Sans means without. So any font that doesn't have those little lines at the end like Aris Medium, the example here, is known as a sans serif font. Those are often much harder to read. You also need to take into consideration that there are fonts that fonts can be bolded, italicized, and that there are other fonts where the letters are justified and that each take up the same space, and there are still other fonts where the letters are more squished together, so they take up less space. You also need to know when you're dealing with headline length how to count characters. A character is not just a letter. It also includes spaces. So for instance, my title of this slide is headline length. So the number of characters would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Headline length is 15 characters, but 14 letters. Spaces count as a character. Your assignment for this direct instruction is what are 5 things that you need to keep in mind when writing headlines? Answer this question in the submission box for the assignment. And if you have any questions about writing headlines as you work through this week's other assignments, please let me know, and have a great week.